Resilience is for your mind what strength is for your muscles. You know, you go and train, you go into the gym and you lift heavy things to build strength, not to be strong in the gym, so that when you need it, you are strong.
Welcome along to Execs Who Run, conversations on life, leadership, and the miles in between. I'm Jason Hunt, your host, and today I am joined by Tim Dettmann, physio, a former health exec, a guy who's been quietly chasing some pretty big questions. How can we actually help people live healthier lives? And how far can we push ourselves on the run and in life without losing the joy of it? Tim started out wanting to work with elite athletes, but early in his career he made a pivot towards helping everyday Australians move better, live better, and stay active longer. After stepping away from the business he helped build, he's been on a different kind of journey. Coast-to-coast races, Berlin Marathon, pacing friends through 100-milers, and chasing down whatever's next. This one's more than just about running. It's about purpose, pace, and building a life around the things and the people that matter. So let's dive in. Welcome along to the show, Tim. How are you doing today?
Mate, I'm fantastic. What a Monday. And thank you very much for having me. Thank you for the invite to come on and have a chat.
No, not a problem. I'm looking forward to this one. I think I look forward to most of these, to be fair, but I think you've got a really, really interesting story yourself, which I know you won't want to talk about too much. We'll get that out of you, but also just some generally interesting thoughts, concepts, approaches to health, which I think will be something that resonates with listeners. But before we dive into all of that, we do a little bit of a warm-up, and really for this, it's tell me about your last run. Your last training run, was it this morning, whatever, and what was it like?
I was listening to a couple of your podcast episodes over the last few weeks, so I knew this was coming. My last training run was an awesome run Sunday morning in the Kieser National Park out near Davidson. It's about 20 Ks with about 600 meters elevation with a really, really good mate of mine, Hugh Longman. We chatted. We haven't caught up for a little while, so we chatted the entire way, even going up gradients that were far steeper than I was used to or planning for, probably. And I should say that was a horrible way to recover from having done UTA 22 the week before.
It sounds like a pretty intense recovery run. Would you, as the health professional that you are, recommend a run like that as a recovery run post-race?
Yeah, it wasn't the ideal recovery run. So I was at UTA and then I paced for a friend who was doing the miler in the evening. So I ended up running through the night. So I should have taken a full week off. But I love running from a social perspective. And I hadn't seen Longy for ages. And he's got a couple of young kids and time just lined up. So I was always saying yes. And I honestly do think that the social and the psychology benefits of running outweigh the physical sometimes. So yeah. From a physiological point of view, I shouldn't have done it. And socially, I had a great time. It's a perfect Sunday.
All right, that's our first bit of expert advice for the podcast. There'll be plenty more to come. I want to dive into your running first. And I'm spoiling some of your story, but you've done running to some extent pretty much your whole life, and we'll dive into that. But What I get really interested in is understanding the point at which people start to treat it as something more. I think a lot of people go and they do some sport at school and running's part of that or whatever it might be, or even if they're track athletes at school, there's at some point when they're doing it later in their life that it becomes something more deliberate for them. So tell me about how you started running back at school and then cross over to that point where running was now a deliberate thing for you.
Yeah, I grew up in country Victoria in a little town called Macedon. So I spent 99% of my life outside running around, chasing my older brother and eventually chasing my little brother. And so I grew up playing footy. So we always ran. We did cross country at school. Our primary school was state orienteering champions. So there was just always running in my life. And I was very fortunate to have a bit of talent in running and also have a mind that was conducive to discipline. So when it came to intervals or doing training, I really enjoyed it, enjoyed the difficulty of it. The inflection point for me was, I can't remember why I signed up to Gold Coast Half Marathon, maybe about 7 or 8 years ago, but Signed up to it, trained a little bit, had no idea what I was doing, but ran a fairly good time. Ran, I think, an 86 or 87-minute half. And I had too many beers that night. And whilst having too many beers, I said to a mate, hey, 87 minutes times 2, I should be able to run under 3 hours for a marathon. And he said, there's no chance you're running under 3 hours for a marathon. And I'm not a real competitive person in that I'm never going to be competitive with you. I'm definitely a little bit competitive with my brothers, but it's not about the people around me, but I'm definitely internally competitive. And so at that point I thought, yeah, I'm going to give this a go. And I still had no idea, really no idea about training, no idea about nutrition, about carbs, recovery, all that stuff. But I went down to Melbourne and I can't remember what year this was, but I ran a 2:59:15 and I had to go to the bathroom at kilometer 40. And at the end of the marathon, I couldn't talk. I was exhausted. I was sore for days. And I've just developed an addiction from there because I thought, oh, well, I ran 2:59:15, but I had to go to the bathroom. So that definitely means that I can run a 2:58. And then I started to learn a little bit more about the nutrition side of things. So I thought, well, okay, if I can not go to the toilet, I can wear the super shoes, I can train a little bit better, I can eat some carbs. Well, maybe each of those is worth 1 minute each. And so that's where it started. So it was back at Gold Coast half marathon was really the inflection point. But the motivation is this real internal, I wonder how much more I can do question.
I think that's quite a common trait with endurance athletes in general, right? Like there's a level of, regardless of what level you're at, there is an aspect where you're competitive against the people that you're running against or doing whatever endurance sport it is. But most of the time, and I certainly feel this way anyway, it's about me. It's about like getting faster and bettering what I did last time as opposed to the competitive element. So I resonate, and I'm sure a lot of people listening probably fall in that bucket as well.
Jason, wouldn't it be cool? I've thought about this and I don't know what the measure is, but your marathon PB is faster than mine, right? I still think mine's, pretty good if you measured it in percentile rank.
Yeah.
But I don't care about that. What I care about is what's my marathon time compared to my potential. And the thing that I'm proudest of is I think that compared to a lot of people, my PB is closer to my potential than a lot of others.
Yeah.
And I think if we could come up with that measure, people would stop comparing themselves to others because it's useless. Like, one of the most impressive half marathons that I've seen was my now ex-sister-in-law who ran her first half marathon after having 2 kids. And I think the effort and energy and focus and mental motivation that goes into that is far superior than, me going out and running something fast. But our times were, wildly different. And yeah, I really love that idea of, okay, that's how fast you run, but how close is it to your potential?
I love the concept, and I think about that a fair bit as well. I always give myself a target that I'm going for. At the moment, I've kind of got 2 targets. I want to run a sub 220 at some point in the kind of nearish future, but 224 is kind of the next target to be able to enable that. But then I kind of go, well, if I can run a 220, could I run like a 215? And then like, when does it stop? So I really like that idea of what is your potential and how close you are to it. But, and I'm going to digress a little bit here, I came across this fascinating graph the other day, and I don't know if you've seen it, but essentially it maps out marathon times, the average marathon times. And what's really interesting is at each half an hour point, so at 2:30, 3, 3:30, 4, 4:35, there's this massive spike just before that, and then it drops off, and then you get to the next one, it spikes again. And it's because people are trying to get under a certain time, right? But what that got me thinking about was how, and tying back actually to your psychological benefits of running, how mental endurance running is. Because if that was how it should be a beautiful normal distribution around some average, and it should be nice and smooth, but it's not, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not physical, it's psychological.
Yeah, I have seen that graph and wondered the exact same thing. And I think that everybody who looks at that, should ask themselves the question of, have I set an arbitrary goal
Mm.
because I want to break some magical 3 hour or, or 2:30 or 2:20 mark, or have I actually got the best out of myself? And that's a real challenge in running. Every time I get close to an event and I chat to my coach about, okay, well, what pace are we going to go out at? I don't know what pace to go out at, but the implications of what I choose to do for the first 5Ks really could have a big impact down the track.
Mm.
And it's almost kind of arbitrary what I
Yeah.
choose to do for the first 5Ks. And I think that I'll segue back and forth between leadership and running, hopefully pretty comfortably. When looking after a team of people, and depending on the task, but often I would just say to my team when they would bring work back to me, is I would say, hey, is this your best work? Like, not even ask them to present it or go into detail. And sometimes they would honestly say, oh, no, it's not. And, I could just kind of end the meeting there and they would go back, come back a couple of days later and put their best into it. And, I think, I love the parallels between running and leadership and running and work life for that reason. I'm obsessed with putting in your best effort.
Well, you are the perfect guest for this show then, given that's what we're trying to do. And we might use that as a nice, beautiful segue into learning a bit about your career. Now, as someone who was obviously quite sporty at school, I know, was getting into physio, which what you did, the obvious path for you?
Yeah. So I was quite sporty. I was also fortunate to be academically quite smart as well. So we'd get high grades in school. And naturally, I don't know if everyone else did this, but I looked at, okay, well, do I want to be a doctor? Do I want to go into legal and be a lawyer? And in the end, I decided on physio because, to be honest, I didn't really know that much, but I thought I was just going to be an AFL physio. I worked out a couple of things in the very first few years of being at uni. One was that if I wasn't an AFL physio, there would be another physio who came in and did a wonderful or perhaps even better job than me looking after an AFL team. But I looked at, the average Australian adult and I realized just how inactive they were. So about 20% of Australians meet our physical activity guidelines of aerobic and strength training activity. So 1 in 5. And that it bemused me. I didn't understand it because I'd just always been active. I'd grown up on 20 acres. We kind of had to be active all the time. But also it frustrated me. It kind of felt like an injustice. Like, as I learned more and more about the health benefits of exercise, which are far more than just controlling your weight or, decreasing your pain from arthritis. So much more than that. I was like, I think this is unfair that more people don't have access and partake in exercise. And that was kind of first year of uni when I then, stopped worrying so much about elite sport and started thinking about, hey, how can I take exercise to the population? And it wasn't about taking hands-on physio, massage, dry needling, taping to the population. It was about taking exercise. Mm-hmm. I thought I'd probably open a gym called Tim Dettmann's Physio and Gym, and I'd have one of them, and it'd be great. And we'd have people come in, and I would prescribe them an exercise program after their physio, and they'd get a great result. And what actually happens, like all good things in career and in business, is I had a fortunate moment at footy training one night where the then president of our footy club, Gary Harley, said, hey, Tim, I want you to come and look at this new gym that I've just brought to the country. And Gary had bought a gym called Kieser Training to Australia. The rest is really history. I was the second employee and then partner of Kieser Australia. And what originally started as a strength training facility ended up being 50% physiotherapy and 50% strength training. And we built it up to, when I was very fortunate to leave, we had 26 studios, I think, across Tassie, South Australia, Victoria, Sydney, Queensland, and looking after about 20,000 Australians, keeping them active, which is a really amazing career. So I feel like a bit of a charlatan because I'm actually not an executive who runs. I'm kind of a former executive who runs just at the moment, Jason.
Oh, that's fine. And we'll get to what might be next for you a little bit later. But I want to dive into the Kieser story because something that you've kind of highlighted there is the fact that it is a different model. There's not many physios, or maybe I don't know if there's any other physios out there that it's kind of this 50% physio, 50% gym, and that's a core part of the business model and the healthcare model, probably more importantly. What was it that made it so successful? It's obviously different. Who are you kind of helping? How did that grow? What did you see as kind of the key levers for that growth?
Okay, well, let's step away from Kieser for a second. I'll tell you the Tim Dettmann approach of like what
As
the
you were doing it, you're still? Yeah.
the macro environment of health and exercise in Australia.
Yeah.
Australia has a wonderful fitness and gym industry, and I love so many of those businesses. But the people that they look after, on average, age between 25 and 35. And as a result, most of the things that they look after are aesthetics, and we're starting to see a progression towards health, absolutely. But it's really been aesthetics and weight loss. That's what that industry has been built on for the most part. As a result, you have fitness instructors who have Cert 3 and Cert 4 in fitness. Australia's population is getting older. Australia's population is getting unhealthier. So 51% of Australians have got one chronic disease. About 25% of Australians have got two chronic diseases. And as I said before, only about 1 in 5 Australians are physically active. So the fitness and gym industry kind of caters for young, fit, active people, which is completely juxtaposed to the needs of the population, which is inactive, older, a little bit sick, not really sick, not hospitalized, but a little bit sick. So if I were to start a exercise company tomorrow, I would be targeting those people. And if I was going to target those people, you have to have higher educated team members, because they need to be able to converse on type 2 diabetes, on arthritis, on the health benefits of strength training for osteoporosis, on why, if you partake in strength training, your risk of cardiovascular disease comes down 17%. You need to be able to converse on those things. The number one thing for those people is physical and psychological safety. And then the flow on is you would create a completely different environment. So let's take F45, right? I love F45. This is absolutely not a criticism, because they have built a wonderful business for their clientele. But they have lots of mirrors and they have lots of loud music, and everything happens really quickly. And mirrors for people aged over the age of 50 who aren't physically healthy, they're like the worst things ever. Loud music, like my parents complain about loud music all the time. And speed is in an exercise sense, as you get older, speed is one of the really big risk factors for injury. I reckon I could reduce injuries in the gym industry in Australia by 25% just by getting everyone to slow down. Just
Could
get
you do
them to
that
move slowly.
across age groups as well? Like, have we created this industry that's inherently dangerous even for, young people in that 20 to 35 age group?
There's a couple of things I would do a little bit differently. I think one of the problems with exercise, and you would have seen this in running, right, is everyone wants to be fit tomorrow. And the way that soft tissues work in your body, or the way that your entire body works, is that you've got to earn the right to exercise. And when you're young, it doesn't take you that long to earn the right to exercise. In fact, when you're a kid, it takes you no time at all. But if you're, let's just say 40 and you haven't exercised for a while, can you get back to running? Yes. Can you run a marathon? Absolutely. Can you do it tomorrow? No. You've got to earn the right to do it. And the length of the run-up does change a little bit with age. So I often say to people who are starting exercise, I say, don't try and build your fitness in the first 6 weeks. In the first 6 weeks, you're just trying to build your resilience. Then after that, we can worry about fitness. But that's a pretty hard thing to convince humans of, isn't it, Jason?
We hate waiting for things, right? We want everything now, which I understand it. I've worked as well with a few people from a running perspective, and I've bashed it into them long enough that they've got it, but yeah, I want to run a marathon in 4 months. And I'm like, do you want to run a marathon or do you want to run a marathon well? And it's those kind of things. Or do you actually want to be at the start line? And they get there eventually. But it is a challenge that I guess everyone in the health industry has to face, right? Our bodies need time to adjust and sometimes we don't give it to them.
Yeah, and I could talk about this for hours, but I do
Mm.
think that the structure of the gym and fitness industry in Australia, and also the non-willingness of the health industry to have some role in exercise, is actually a big contributor to why so many of us are inactive at the
Mm.
moment. And so my career for the last 15 years and for the next 15 years for sure will be in that space between the traditional gym industry and the traditional health industry, which is a medical exercise type
Yeah.
industry. The gap is big. It's way too big. It shouldn't exist at all, but that's where I live and breathe.
Well, let's go back to the Kieser story and your story as part of that. I know you don't like talking about it, but we're going to do that anyway. So, as the business scaled, and maybe even from a leadership perspective, what was that like for you? Because yes, you were kind of someone coming in to run this business, but you're a physio, right? You're a health practitioner. That was what you wanted to do. So,
Yeah.
what did that kind of process from physio and then kind of business owner into actual leader scaling this business across the country?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate to build my business up with partners. Some of those partners were my age and going through a similar experience, and some of those partners were older and had been through the experience of building up their own business. And so it meant that I had mentors really early. And it's something that if you ask my parents, they would say that Tim was always a really curious kid, and curious manifests itself sometimes as like being at a surf beach and trying to see how far out the back you can go. Curious in a work or in a personal development perspective manifests it as I started an MBA when I was 25 because I was like, well, everyone else can do this. Why can't I do it? I'll give it a go. And then I just asked lots of people. I had so many mentors over time. I've always asked questions. I used to think that the smartest person in the room was the one who had all the answers. And I realize now that the smartest person in the room is the one who has the best questions. The amount of coffees or dinners or lunches that I have purchased for people way smarter than me would number in the hundreds comfortably. It probably would approach 1,000, honestly. So I did go from being a clinician to being a team leader to being a clinic leader to really looking after a region to 12 of those 14 years without a job title, really, Jason. I ended with a job title that was Chief Marketing Officer, but I really did every job in between. So some of it came from formal education, and the MBA was wonderful because I have a bit of an academic and a bit of science background. So I loved getting the framework, but the most important lessons were either through application or through asking people who had applied all of those lessons before and been through stuff that I was about to go through.
An awesome journey, and obviously it was successful, and we'll get to the end of it in a second. But was there a point where you went, man, it would be cool to be doing stuff with elite sports still? Like, this is what you had as a kid and that's what you wanted to do. Did you ever second guess what you were doing or think about heading into that space again?
So moments, right? Absolutely. Like moments where I had friends who were with AFL teams or who I had friends who were at the Oz Open or stuff like that. There was moments of it, but there were far more moments of, oh my God, I can't believe how unhealthy Australia is, or I can't believe that no one else is doing this. Or even when we started this business, we had a couple of conversations about, oh, how big do we think it can get? But at no point did we think about it being, at no point early did we think about it being 25 clinics. And I'm no longer involved, but those guys will go and double or triple the size of that business. It will have a huge impact on the health of Australia because it just became more and more obvious that that group of people, average age of 55, are not being looked after. They're just desperate to try and be healthier. And they're like, where do I go? So yeah, moments, but they were far, far outweighed by good experiences of the impact we were having.
And so why the decision to step away from the business then?
Yeah, because I want to change everybody in Australia. I had a great time. I had a great time at that business. It was wonderful. And an opportunity came up for me to leave and for me to have an impact on the whole industry. And there's two that I think of when I say that, Jason. That's really what I would like to do in my career. And one way to go about that would be to run that business and to double it and triple it in size. And good luck to my partners who are still there and will do that. And another way to do it would be to try and work with other business, to try and work with organizations. And the two industries I think of, one are impacting the health of Australia. I think the first step in doing that is that we need to change the careers of healthcare practitioners. So another problem that I saw really early when I was studying physio was they would come to us and they would say the average career span of a physiotherapist is 5 years. And I was like, I studied for 4 years to then go and do a career of 5. And I've seen so many good physios lost to our profession. They stay somewhere close. They might go into case management, working for insurance, or, some of them are lost completely. And we as an industry have to do something differently to keep physios longer term. One of the ways to do that is to build a bigger, more sustainable business so you can build a career path. And they're the two changes that I would like to see. If I could look back on my career whenever it does eventually finish up and say, hey, I had an impact on the careers of health professionals, not just physios, and I had an impact on the health of Australia. They're the two things I'd love to be able to look back and say.
I love it. I want to look back on the time since you've left the business, because this is a running podcast, and I think that's what you've done a fair bit of since you've left and trying to figure out what's next for you. So tell me about the adventures that you've been up to in the last little while.
So I love work. I really enjoy it. I love being around people. And I knew when I left that I thought somewhere between 3 and 6 months, I would get itchy feet and I would want to go back. So I committed to myself that I would take 12 months off. But someone could have offered me the moon and the stars and I would have said, no, I'm going to take a year off. And I just adventured, to be honest, Jason. I went surfing in Mexico. I went to New Zealand and I did coast to coast. I went to Berlin and I ran Berlin Marathon. I went kite surfing on the Great Barrier Reef and 5 hours north of Port Douglas. I just had the most amazing year. And I did each of those activities with a close friend. And where I thought, I might go and move to Spain for 6 months, I quickly realized that what I enjoyed the most and where I got most of my energy, I was actually spending time with people. So Berlin, I ran with a really close friend of mine named Luke Carlson, who owns a gym in the US and is one of the most passionate marathon runners that you have ever seen. And we caught up with a really good mate of his, William White, who's the CMO for Walmart. And William is equally as passionate as Luke about marathons. And so running friends are a really big part of my life. Have been always, but certainly in the last 15 months since I stepped away.
Yeah. Some awesome events and activities you got up to, but we're going to talk about running.
Yes, yeah.
Tell me about Berlin, and it's a bit of a soft or not a soft spot, a hard spot maybe for me at the moment, because I was also meant to be running in Berlin last year with you. Not with you, but I was meant to be on the start line and I had a few injuries that meant that I didn't get there. But tell me what it was like running Berlin.
Okay, so prior to this, I've run Melbourne Marathon and Gold Coast Marathon a couple of times each, and that's it. And Luke convinces me to come and do one of the world marathon majors, so we meet in Berlin. The catalyst for me to go to Europe was not Berlin Marathon. It was actually Oktoberfest. And they both fall around the same time. Unfortunately, Oktoberfest fell a week before Berlin Marathon. So my preparation for Berlin Marathon was perfect, except for 2 days at Oktoberfest with a guy named Oscar Tate, who's one of the most fun and enjoyable blokes that you will ever meet. The prince of the eastern suburbs of Sydney, I think. But So I arrived in Berlin a week before, and it was, if you've ever been to Berlin before, there's so much history there that I didn't really understand. Some older, some very modern. And what happened through the week is it went from being kind of a tourist city and having some people doing tours of all different types and nationalities to like this influx of fluoro-colored shoes and running singlets and running t-shirts until, there's 50,000, 51,000 people there on marathon day. Perfect weather, crowds are amazing. It's just a great environment.
And it was a pretty good run for you. I'll say the time so you don't have to, because it's never a fun part for runners, but ran a 2:43, which is pretty impressive, as you said before. You're pretty good runner. That there was a reasonably big PB for you. What did the kind of preparation look like going into it? You obviously said you've started focusing on running a bit more over the years, and I think enjoy that gradual improvement that you get from it. But tell me about it all coming together, because that's the best part of an event like this, right?
Yeah, so the way my mind works is I just looked at what all of the pieces were to bring together a really good marathon and tried to get them to line up. And I didn't want to go really hard in one area but let myself down in another. I think lining all your ducks up is important in business and in running as well. So a guy named Tim Locke from the Distance Collective coached me, and Tim, I think he's a big believer in the 80-20 principle. So we did, 80% of my runs pretty slow at talking pace, 20% of them at a pretty high intensity. My lead-in was a little bit shorter than I would have liked. It was about 13 weeks because I had an injury after running UTA 100 the year before. So I just had to delay the start to the program a little bit. I did my fair share of research on carbs and carb intake and realized that, and became a really big advocate of taking carbs during training to try and help my recovery. So between applying the 80-20 principle, more carb intake, my body recovered reasonably well. So I had all those things lined up. In the couple of weeks prior to Berlin Marathon, I actually started trialing bicarb. So I took a little bit of bicarb before Berlin Marathon on race day. Raced in Nike Alpha Flies, which not because I think that Nike is absolutely the best brand. I tried a couple of different ones and Nike for me feels the best, but certainly I think if you want to run a fast marathon, you need to be wearing the super shoes these days. And I actually now think that you probably should train in them as well, because it'll help your recovery too. What else was a taper is a really important component to me. So my principle of taper is 50%. So I just halve my volume 2 weeks out and then halve it again 1 week out. Mm-hmm. And then I'll tell you about the 2 mistakes that I made. And this is
was Oktoberfest one of those?
Okay, let's go 3 mistakes. Being mates with Oscar Tate and going to Oktoberfest, mistake. Mistake number 2 was, and this is such a rookie mistake, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say it as a reasonably seasoned runner, was relying on my own GPS on my watch. And the faster you get, the difference between running a 3:49 and a 3:47 multiplied over 20 Ks, that could be the difference between going over or under threshold for me. And I didn't realize until the halfway mark, my watch hit the halfway mark, and then I think I had about another 200 or 300 meters to reach the official halfway mark. And so where I thought I was on time, I was already a little bit behind time. And then this wasn't really a mistake. It probably was. I put this down to, normally I would have a sodium drink the night before and the morning of. And I don't know why I didn't. I just didn't follow my normal routine. And so I actually ended up going to the bathroom, just a quick stop at about 37 or 38 Ks in Berlin. So in my mind, I was still wrapped. I had a PB and I crossed the finish line and I was like, right, I've got another 2 minutes in me. Absolutely. If I pace better and I get my sodium right, or I don't have to go to the bathroom, I've got another 2 minutes. And so for me, and you're probably going to ask this question, but I'll go with it. For me, the next target is Chicago. I keep chasing the flat marathons, Jason.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm with you.
And I'd really like to break 240 there. And I think that longer training block, a couple of group sessions to help push me a little, pacing better and not having to go to the bathroom. I'm confident that I can just incrementally get there.
And not going to Oktoberfest beforehand.
Well, maybe that's all I need to do, actually. Just eat, sleep, and drink a little bit more sensible in the lead up to it. And that, maybe I'm selling myself short and I should be going even quicker.
Well, maybe it was perfect, right? Maybe Oktoberfest was enforced taper because you weren't doing much running and carb loading. So maybe it's the secret.
Yeah, no, I don't think I need to test it again.
Put a caveat out there. This is not official health advice for running a good marathon. Oh, God. Okay, so 240 in Chicago. I'm with you. I reckon you can do that. It'll be easy as you got plenty of time. I wanna talk about another running experience that you've had recently. Actually, before I get into that, first question, because it relates to this: road or trail?
Oh no, I sit on the fence. One of the
You
things
can't
I
know.
love,
Sorry, you're not allowed to sit on the fence.
Okay, if I'm only allowed to do one, then trail. Love being out in the country, in the mountains. I live in Bondi at the moment. I love Bondi. If anyone's ever not having a good time in Bondi, that's on them, not on Bondi. But it's never felt like home for me. I grew up on 20 acres, backing onto a couple 100,000 acres of state forest, and that just had so much bush. And I think that I will always get drawn back to that. So if you're going to make me pick, I'm going mountain, trail, not being able to see buildings. As long as that's the case, then that's where I pick for sure.
Okay. Yeah, well, tell me about pacing your mate recently at UTA.
12 months ago, Ben and his partner Georgia and I all ran the 100K together and trained a lot together and had a great time. Then Ben decided he was going to sign up for the miler this year, and I'd done a little bit of supporting of people. And for anyone who has never supported a 100K race or a miler, if you enjoy running, definitely just find yourself a runner who's going to do it. Supporting these people is unreal. So you're allowed a pacer from 90Ks to 160. So Georgia and I alternated for those 70Ks, and we met Ben. We saw him at, I think, 55Ks at Narrowneck, and he was doing it pretty tough. And he had 35Ks of running by himself to 90. And I think if you asked Ben the hardest part of that 161 kilometers, it was kilometer probably 80 to 85, because he hadn't seen people for ages and he knew that he was going to see some people soon. And I love, like you alluded to before, I love the psychology of running and I love the psychology of exercise, and the idea that the halfway mark was harder because in the second half you were going to have someone next to you tells you so much about running and life, that you like, if you're ever going it alone, that's twice as hard. Whereas doing it with someone else just makes it so much easier. So I joined Benny at 90Ks, ran with him for 5 hours, and then handed the baton over to Georgia at the Aquatic Centre. And it was such a great experience. And I said to Ben, so impressive that not one of his mates ever questioned, would he make it? There was a question of how sore would he be? How long would it take him? No one questioned that. And the guy just put one foot in front of another the entire time. He literally, in the 8 hours I spent with him in total, there was one point at which he stopped to say, oh, gee, my quads are hurting, as we were going downhill. And it was about like the 95K mark or something like that. The rest of the time, he just put one foot in front of the other. And it was a great experience. I really enjoyed it, Jason.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know how this has happened, but as someone who doesn't do ultra running and says that he never will, it's probably going to happen at some point, but says that he never will. I've had a lot of guests on this show so far that are ultra running inclined or in that space, and it's just such a different world. And it's been really interesting for me to kind of learn about it and understand what it takes to get through it and what people are doing in it, because it is a physical thing, but it's not really a physical thing anymore, right? When you think about running a road marathon, it's all physical and the training you do, and it's all built around physiology and all this kind of stuff. Ultra running just seems all in the head.
The reason I love that I'm a bit addicted to that ultra running, and I can't speak for anyone else, but this is what it is for me, is there's a battle between your mind and your body. As there is in a marathon as well. You would have experienced that, where you start to think, oh, this is hard. But it took me 14 hours to run 100 Ks last year. And I reckon I was probably hurting from about hour 4. So it's probably 10 hours of really hurting. And when you cross the line and you know that you've won that battle, that your mind and your body has said, stop, and come up with all these different reasons, like throwing pain in your ankle and pain in your hip and stuff like that, just throwing that at you for 10 hours, and you win that debate, or you win that argument, it is so empowering. And at work, like when things get hard, or in life when things get hard, I don't think about the 80K mark of an ultramarathon. But I don't need to, because I just have this level of comfort that, yeah, things can get hard, and I know that I can keep going. And I can keep going for quite a while. So I think one of the hardest things in life is when you stress about being stressed, metacognition, when you're thinking about being stressed. So I think as an ultra runner, or my experience is, you don't have as much of that, because you know, all right, yes, today's hard. Today was a bad day, or today I'm stressed. But you're not worried about that. You know that you can get through. I hope that makes sense to you and anyone who's listening to it. But that's why I do it and why I enjoy it.
Yeah, maybe I'll reframe, because it's certainly something I've been thinking about, certainly over the last 6 months and probably even longer. And it's resilience. And it's such a buzzword that people throw out there in so many different settings. And as a runner and someone who works in recruitment, it's always something you think about. And you want senior executives who've got resilience from their career, and they're going to be better in the challenges you put them in. And to be honest, it hasn't really been until recently that I've actually understood what that is, and that resilience is only built by doing hard things, or by being in hard positions, or by going through challenges. Like, people aren't innately resilient. I think people are predispositioned to be able to deal with things a bit better than others, but that resilience is built over time by doing hard things. So as you talk about, kind of, you don't think about being at the 80K mark in an ultra marathon and go, oh yeah, I can do this. You've already done it, and so you kind of know what a hard thing is, and now every other hard thing is not as hard afterwards.
Yeah, Jason, resilience is for your mind what strength is for your muscles. You know, you go and train, you go into the gym and you lift heavy things to build strength, not to be strong in the gym, so that when you need it, you are strong. And I think the brain is so underlooked, under cared for by most people. Like I will go and do a hard thing out of my comfort zone every year, at least one every year for the rest of my life, because just like if you don't use your muscles, your strength comes down. I think if you don't stretch your resilience, it shrinks. But I'll do that. I see a psychologist every couple of months, because I don't need a personal trainer for strength training, because that's my background, but I need someone who is far more qualified in the brain and in psychology than what I am. So I see that person because I want to be really sharp. I want to remain sharp right through my career and into old age as well. And I want to deal with complex problems that are people related or that are strategic related, or, you know, my life's become hard. So I want the skills there as well. I think that everybody should have a bit of a plan for how they're going to look after their lungs, how are they going to look after their heart, their muscles, but also their brain too.
Yeah. Running's good for that.
Yes. Yeah.
It certainly helps, right?
Yeah.
And as you said, like running with people as well, and that social aspect, like all good stuff for the brain. I want to pivot into what's next for you, because obviously you spend a good chunk of your working career now building up this business and fighting the good fight that is trying to make Australia healthy. You've taken a bit of a break and gone and done some fun things. I feel like there's a lot of different avenues you could potentially jump down. You kind of talked about two different industries you would look at, but what does next actually look like for you?
So the first thing I wanted to sort out was actually when we opened 26 clinics, we pretty much opened them in the 26 most affluent suburbs of Australia. And that was great. But I really wanted to do something for people who maybe don't have the same opportunities, that don't live in Mossman, Double Bay, Brighton and Camberwell. So I've been really fortunate to, by the network of friends that I've got, build a relationship with two charities. So one's called TriMob, and I met the CEO and founder of TriMob, Nat Heath, on a run. We ran to the Sydney Harbour 10K together, had a coffee afterwards. And now I coach Nat, I executive coach Nat, and try and help him build TriMob. And quick background on TriMob is that Ironman started on the island of Hawaii in 1978. Between 1978 and 2023, 13 Indigenous Australians were known to have completed the Ironman distance, one of which was Nat Heath. By June 16, which is the day after Cairns Ironman this year, Nat Heath and Ironman will have doubled that number in 2 years.
That's cool. That's very cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. And it's been such a lesson for me. And the deal between Nat and I is, I said, Nat, you teach me about what it's like to be an Indigenous Australian, and I'll teach you how to grow a business. And he said, right, done. And so I've learned so much off Nat.
What has been your biggest learning from him so far?
Nat and the Indigenous people that I've met through TriMob have a connection to community and to country that is so much larger than I could ever have fathomed. I've said to Nat a couple of times, I have never thought of myself as a descendant of any English person who arrived here a couple of years ago. I think about my parents and my grandparents, and honestly, it stops about there. And the way that Nat thinks about his aunties and uncles and his community and how strongly he belongs to that community, I didn't understand. And I think unless you sat down for coffee and had meals with Indigenous people and you've listened to their stories, I don't know how anyone could understand that. That's been a really big learning curve for me.
It's cool. It's cool that you've spent the time to learn that and wanted to learn that. I think that's something we could all do a little bit more of, which is nice.
So the other charity that I've started doing some work with, and literally just volunteering, and so anyone else who wants to do this can come and do it as well, is a charity called Ocean Heroes. And Ocean Heroes takes kids with autism, or kids on the spectrum, I should say, out surfing. And I tell you, I enjoy running and my mates enjoy running. You have never seen joy like the joy of an autistic kid learning to surf or surfing for the first time. Sam Moyle, who is the founder of Ocean Heroes, who's a WA boy who now lives in Sydney, what he's done with that charity is just amazing, because, that's an example of a group of people who don't get the same access to exercise as what everyone else does. And, I said before about this kind of injustice in my mind about older Australians not getting access to the gym and strength training and exercise. The same switch gets flipped in my mind when I think about, why has there only been 13 Indigenous people who've partaken in an Ironman? And, why can't kids who've got autism get the opportunity to go surfing as well? So this is like a real long roundabout way of saying step number one was start doing a little bit of philanthropic work. And philanthropic work doesn't mean just giving money, which I've been fortunate to do, but I think there's a lot of not-for-profits in this country that need time and expertise more than they do money. That was step one. Now we're on to step two, which is me deciding what I want to do next in my, for me, in my career. And I've realized, having done a little bit of presenting and a little bit of consulting into businesses, which I'm absolutely open to doing. The thing that I really enjoy is seeing long-term progress. So I just took on a client to do a little bit of executive coaching with her, who runs her own, say, allied health business. One of the things I said is, I'll only do this if you commit for 12 months. What I can teach in 3 months is, I can teach a little bit, but I want to be there for the progress. So that's something that I'll do for the interim, but I think it's inevitable that I'll start my own business again.
I like it. We're coming near the end of this conversation. It's been great. My usual end is getting 3 pieces of advice, one on life, one on leadership, one on running. If you've listened, you've probably heard that. I want to do 4 for you, because it would be remiss not to get your wise piece of wisdom about exercise or health, or give it a bigger bubble so you can jump on your soapbox and share the most important one to you. But yeah, give us your 1 piece of advice on life, 1 on leadership, 1 on running, and then 1 on exercise and health.
Oh, okay. This is tough. The piece of advice that I've given to a number of people on life in the last 12 months is, at the end of the day, the only opinion that will affect whether you do or don't sleep at night is your own. And so you can never, ever know yourself and your values too well. Because if you know yourself and your values really, really well, you know whether you're abiding by them or not. My leadership advice, this one comes from my psychologist. I'll give him credit, Michael Player. He's a great guy, Michael. And he often says to me, your brain is like tofu. It takes on the flavors of everything that you marinated in. So in leadership, surround yourself with really good leaders who you want to be like. And that, I'm not talking about people in your organization, but like, if you see someone who you like, go and buy them coffee. And if you don't know them, just hit them up on LinkedIn, or find someone who does know them. I've had conversations with people in the UK and in the US at 3 a.m. in the morning because I randomly hit them up or got an introduction, and I took the time to have a video call with them in the middle of the night. So yeah, just surround yourself with good people and good content. I think that's super important for your brain. What was the third question, Jason?
The most important one. Everyone, I really should break this up more because everyone does this, but the most important one, of course, running.
Oh, okay. What's my running advice? I think, well, this kind of only applies to a certain group of people who, I don't know, are motivated this way. But my running advice is line up all of your ducks. So I see people who train really well, but they never ever take carbs during training. So their recovery's, it's just reduced. And I think that you have to line up your shoes, your nutrition, your hydration, your training, your recovery, and your psychology. My coach, Tim Locke, always before a race says, all right, what are the 3 things you're going to think about when it gets hard? I think that's a great thing. But yeah, my advice on running is line up all of your ducks. No, shoes are not more important than nutrition. Nutrition is not more important than training. Each of those things interacts with each other. Line them all up. And my exercise advice, so I don't have to think about this for a second. Most people in Australia don't lift enough weights. My advice to everybody is lift weights twice a week. You only need to do it for half an hour. You only need to do 1 set of about 10 exercises, but you need to lift weights. It is, in my opinion, biased opinion, actually not biased anymore because I don't even own a business in that area. Non-biased opinion is that it is the thing that will have the biggest impact on your health.
I like it. I want to get really technical on that one because I think it's a beautiful piece of advice, but there's a lot of barriers there, right? Like the going to a gym for a start, quite a big barrier for a lot of people. Finding 30 minutes and, people need to prioritize, but you getting to the gym, the time, it all takes time. When you say lifting weights, is there a way that people can do that at home? Like what's the most accessible way that people can achieve that piece of advice?
Okay, great question. Such a good question. The only thing that is important is fatigue. It's the only
Okay.
thing. Your body doesn't know whether you're lifting free weights or using machines. There's really good evidence that your results are exactly the same. I'm not the biggest advocate of bands for a couple of reasons, but they still work really well. As long as you can get fatigued, it doesn't matter whether you're doing 5 repetitions, 10 repetitions, or 20 repetitions. It doesn't matter whether you're lifting a light weight or a heavy weight. It's just about, can you get a little bit fatigued by the end? And as long as you're moving slowly, the risk of strength training is incredibly low as long as you move slowly. So it's a really safe thing for people to do. So yes, you can do it at home. Free weights, machines, doesn't matter. Body weights is great. Bands are great. All of those things are great. It just comes down to, you need to get tired doing it.
Perfect. That's nice and easy. Thank you. I think it's a useful piece, because I think when people hear go to the gym, they're like, of course, like that's hard, but just go and fatigue your muscles. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
and probably my only little follow up to that is just do it consistently. Like don't think about 6 weeks or 8 weeks. Like you're much better off doing a really small amount, but doing it for the rest of the year than you are. I hate the idea of like a 6-week body transformation or a boot camp. Just, it is actually much more simple than people think. Just do it consistently.
I'm the same with running, right? I think people, as a running coach, I won't work with anyone who's not what I kind of term as a lifestyle runner, like someone who doesn't see it as part of their life over the long term, because A, you get better results, but B, I don't want you to be focusing on this next marathon or whatever it is, because that's not how endurance sport works. And I always talk to people, even when they're focusing on that, like just at least run 2 times a week when you're not training for these things. Just that level of consistency will help you to no end when you do decide to go and do another event or whatever it might be. And yeah, as you say, like exactly the same with strength training or any endurance you're doing.
Yeah, we will see a change in this over the next, I hope it's 5, but it's more likely to be 10 years, where motivation for a lot of the things that we've been speaking about is health and long-term health. And that that's the base level. And then we put bricks on top of that for performance or specialization and things. But we really need to understand that there is a base level that is just about health. Like you need to do 2 strength training sessions a week of some sort for your health. I'm talking about bodybuilders, like just health. And I think that will change over the next 5 or 10 years, is that running twice a week or any cardiovascular exercise twice a week, like you just described, that will just be the base level foundation for our health.
Let's get people healthier. Unfortunately, I feel like the listeners of this podcast maybe aren't the target audience of this advice, but I think the strength training one is massive. I think a lot of people don't do enough of that even in their regular stuff. So that is useful anyway. Well,
I hope so.
Thank you so much for this. It's been an awesome conversation. You've obviously got a lot of cool insight and wisdom to share, and a cool story yourself, even though you don't talk about it as much. So I really, really appreciate you coming on. If people want to follow along on what Tim does get up to next, or what crazy adventures he might be up to, what's the best way to do that?
Look, I am trying to be a little bit more active on LinkedIn these days, so you'll find me pretty easily on LinkedIn. If you want to know what adventures I'm up to, or if you want some ideas for adventures to do around the world, then my Instagram just seems to be an adventure page these days. A few family moments in there and stuff like that, but yeah, mostly adventures. So one of those two. And if anyone ever wants to have a chat, I'm always really open to meeting good people and having a chat that may or may not lead somewhere. So just reach out and make contact. It would be great to end up having a coffee with someone off the back of this.
Just make sure you buy him a coffee to offset all the coffee he's bought other people. Awesome. Hey, well, thank you very much, Tim. It's really been a pleasure.
Hey, Jason, thank you very much for having me, and thank you for putting this podcast together. I've listened to a couple of your other episodes and I love where this is going. So best of luck to you in the future as this builds as well.
Appreciate it. I'm enjoying it. So that's the main thing, right?
Thanks, Jason.
And that is it for another episode of Execs Who Run. Tim's story really is a reminder that your path doesn't have to stay linear. And sometimes the most meaningful impact comes from when you step back, slow down, and ask what really matters. Whether it's building a national health business, running a sub 2:45 marathon, or pacing a mate through the night, Tim shows us that leadership isn't just about results. It's about presence, purpose, and showing up with consistency. If this conversation resonated with you, please do us a favour. Follow Execs Who Run on your favourite podcast platform, leave a rating or review, and more importantly, share this episode with someone who's chasing their own version of the long run. You can connect with me on LinkedIn and follow the podcast on Instagram, LinkedIn, or at execswhorun.com. Thanks for being here, and until next time, if in doubt, just go running.